So it is an absolute pleasure to talk to you today about HR data. We're going to do a little bit of a mix of the basics of what is HR data, but also what does being a data-led HR team mean? What are the kind of things that teams might be doing differently? And what's it all about, essentially? So here's my really boring, sad page about who I am. I am a self-confessed HR data nerd, which I say with pride. I've had about 10 years working in both in-house roles and consulting as well. And that's kind of backed by 5 years in academia before that. So from bachelor's to master's, which I did in HR because I love it and have always kind of loved HR. So everything that we're going to talk about today is kind of my sort of 15 years all distilled into an hour, just to kind of help you start to understand the fundamentals of HR data. So, I mean, some of the roles that I've had have included HR system advisor, manager, data and reporting specialist. So a real kind of mix. I've been managing LMS systems, HR systems. I've done gender pay gap reporting, worked on global data strategy, done some transformation and training projects as well. And I've even had data externally assured. So if any of you are a little bit further on your kind of data journey and are thinking about things like ESG reporting and gender pay gap reporting as well, and having that externally assured, which is essentially audited, and somebody signs off to say, yep, we've checked it and it's definitely right. That's something I've done before. It's a really intense process, but it's really incredible and useful for building the foundations and the fundamentals of reporting as an HR team. So I do recommend it if any of you are thinking about it. Now I pretty much deliver the foundations of HR data program. Not going to talk about that now. That's not the point of the call, but I will sort of a couple of minutes at the end, just if any of you hang on and you're curious about what it is. And I do share some more information about that at the end. So I'm going to literally start flying into the webinar. And the kind of things that we're going to be talking about, as I said, what is HR data? I find that people don't really explain that very well. And that can then get quite confusing. Got different terms, different ways of saying things. And it gets confusing if we're not kind of clear on what we mean. So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about what data analysis is and the different types as well, because I think that's a really important point that quite often gets missed. As promised, obviously data-led decision-making, what it is, and the kind of skills that you might need to make that happen. The principles of HR data, and now these are things that I have kind of have as rules for myself that I've built from all of the work that I've done in my time, but they are really, really important. So we're going to kind of go through them and they'll help you to think about the way that you shape systems and reporting and stuff as well. We're also going to go through literally a slide of some shortcuts for Excel that I use all the time. They're super kind of handy to know, speed things up. It's just a tiny little thing, but as I said, really, really handy. And there is also a worksheet or a handout I'm going to email afterwards with some of my other favorite Excel features and formulas that you might start to think about using, or you might already be using. And as promised at the end, firstly, a couple of minutes just to tell you about the program, but most importantly, some Q&A time as well. So yes, both of those are going to happen at the end once we've kind of gone through the main content. I'm just going to check that you can all hear me and everything. There's no comments about any issues. No, we're all good. So please let me carry on. So I said that I would talk about some of the key terms. And I'm going to start by just running through really boring, really basic HR data. This one is talked about all the time, and I don't think anybody really explains what we're talking about when we talk about HR data. So it's really kind of the core data, the raw data that you have, the information that you're collecting and saving about your employees, about your applicants, and about your HR processes as well. So it could be demographics, it could be job history, could be performance metrics, could be about compensation or offers and dates that things happen, all sorts of different things. But it's that really kind of like basic, just what's in a spreadsheet. Here's the numbers that exist, or the categories, or the different types of things that exist. Typically coming out of ATS systems, HR systems, LMSs, payroll systems, and even offline spreadsheets as well, because depending on where you are in your journey, might not have that kind of capacity within a system, or even have the system for it. But essentially, it's anything that can help you run analysis and make some decisions. So yeah, really kind of fundamental raw numbers. Data analysis is what you do with that raw data. So you're starting to look at patterns, trends, connections, and insights, meaning basically, that comes out of the HR data. So pulling it together in different ways, looking at it with different lenses to figure out what's going on with those numbers, with that HR data. It could be about statistics, it could be about data visualization, or it could just be research into those numbers and what's going on as well. Data cleaning is something that is definitely thrown around, and I think lots of people don't know when they're doing it, because it is quite different and it's quite unique, but it's a really important part of the process, and it's one of those things that everybody tells you that you need to do, but you have no idea what it is, but you're probably already doing it. So just to kind of clarify what data cleaning is, it's the process of maybe categorizing information, looking for gaps, removing mistakes. So you might have double spaces in people's names, which means you can't match them between spreadsheets. There could be typos, again, which means you can't look things up or match them. And essentially neatening up the HR data that you've got so that you can analyze it, getting it really clean, getting it really kind of ready to go so that you can just run a pivot table and find all of the answers. And the cleaning process for me actually ends up taking probably 85% of the process, because it's just so much work to make sure that it's all perfect. And you can obviously improve that through your systems and processes, but sometimes it just happens. Gaps exist, issues exist. So data cleaning is really important. The next one is metrics. And this one is what I think lots of people think about when it comes to HR data. So it's essentially those numbers or those indicators that you're using to track and evaluate your staff, your processes, your programs, and the outcomes of what you do as an HR team as well. So in an ideal world, you'd be doing this in a standardized way. So the same process, the same data, the same way of doing the analysis every time. And also different companies would do that as well, so that their data is really easy to compare. Doesn't always happen, but that's the kind of gold standard. Metrics, as I said, you'll be really familiar with them, but essentially things like turnover rate, time to fill, absenteeism, everything that you're definitely already looking at, that's what metrics are. Dashboards, just to kind of summarize and clear up and put their piece in the puzzle, they're just the visual representations or the kind of combinations of all of those metrics and analysis. So obviously it's mostly graphs, but sometimes it can be actual data points. It gives you a summarized or consolidated view of all of those metrics. It's all in one place. It's something you can share within the team, outside of the team, and it's just a sort of quick look, here's what's going on type of document. Reporting is kind of it. So quite a lot of these you'll see are interrelated, and reporting can be a dashboard. You can report a dashboard, but it can also be a bit broader than that as well. So reporting is that process of creating, but also sharing HR related data. So as I said, it could be a dashboard, but it could also be kind of a pack. So a PowerPoint document that kind of shows the journey from here's the issue, here's the insights that we've gained, and here's the kind of outputs and recommendations at the end. But it's looking at trends, challenges, issues, problems, and describing them, using metrics, using analysis to explain that and pass that on to other stakeholders. The final one is analytics, which again, I think is really regularly talked about, but in quite a confusing way. So just to kind of explain a little bit more about analytics, it is, I guess, a subset of analysis. It's at that kind of more advanced end. So thinking about statistical models, predictive analytics, things like that, looking at the more advanced end, understanding what's going on, what trends have been, what kind of historically has happened, and then using that to think forward, to predict what might happen, and to make those data-driven decisions as well. So when I say this is at the advanced end, you could be using things like machine learning, big data, data mining, and predictive modeling as well. So not just some of the more basic statistics, but some of the really complicated statistics, really advanced analysis. That's what we're talking about when we talk about analytics. So that leads me nicely onto the different types of data analysis. I found this graph online, or this graphic. I can't confess to have made it myself, but it just perfectly summed up what I wanted to talk about. And so when we're looking at data analysis, there's typically 4 different types that you can do. And I'll kind of show them in a second, but before I kind of dig into them, I wanted to just kind of explain how they're kind of related and why they're different. So for example, you can see obviously the graphic is talking about difficulty increasing and value increasing as well. And as both of those things happen, as you use more complex analysis methods, the difficulty of how to do them obviously increases, but the value, the insights, the outputs from those kind of analyses are really, really valuable. And as you can see, competitive advantage increases. So if you're just looking at the lower end of this table, you know, it's useful, but it's not doing as much as it could do for you. As you move through the different stages, the complexity of the analysis increases, but so does the outputs, the value of the outputs, and that gives you the competitive advantage. And as I said, it's kind of moving through that process from just purely sort of talking about what information you can glean from the data to moving into insights. What can we learn from the data? What does it mean? What can we do about it? To the more kind of advanced end, which is actually we can do some really innovative things with it. We can really test the limits of HR, of what's possible, of what we do. And so when we break that down into different types of analysis, we start with descriptive data or descriptive data analysis. And this is something that you'll be really, really familiar with. It's that really kind of simple analysis, the summary data of what happened, what's the status, where are we at? It's the kind of numbers or percentages that you'll be really used to kind of sharing. So a lot of the metrics that we talk about, like turnover rate, for example, is a really good example of descriptive analysis. All it's telling you is what happened, you know, what the situation was, how kind of, how many of something or whatever it is. That's literally all it's telling you. It's just, this is it. This is what happened. And you have to do more with it in order to start to figure out actually, what does it mean? Was that good? Was it bad? Do we need to change it? How do we change it? And that's when the next stage of analysis comes in. So when we start to look at diagnostic data, for example, this is when we start digging into why did it happen? What issues have we got? What problems are there? What's affecting X, Y, Z? So the descriptive data that we've presented, what's impacting it? What's kind of playing a factor in how that increased or decreased? And some of the other things that you might be looking at are, how do we prevent that happening again? If it was a negative outcome, how do we change the outcome next time? You know, maybe we want to improve something. That's the kind of thing that you can answer with diagnostic analysis. And I kind of, when I look at the businesses that I've worked with and broader than that as well, quite often, probably 80–90% of the time, people are just looking at the descriptive data. They present dashboards and reports that say, here's the situation. but they don't move on to that next step of diagnostic analysis to say, why did it happen? What's going on underneath? What's playing a factor in that? And that's a really important stage. You can see it kind of starts to build the insights of what does it actually mean and how can we change it. So it's really, really critical, but it's not used as often as it should be. Once you start getting a bit more advanced, you move into predictive analytics or analysis. And this is where we're kind of thinking about, if X happens, is Y going to happen? What's going to happen in the future? What predictions can we make using this data? So it might be when you forecast headcount, for example, to say, we think that perhaps we can get this many new employees next year based on all of the situation that you're in, like number of recruiters you've got and things like that. And again, that's giving you insight into what's going on, what's happening, and what might happen as well. And at the final end of the process, the really kind of valuable and the bit that most companies haven't even thought about, but the IBMs of the world already know what's going on here. This is prescriptive analysis, and this is neither predictive nor prescriptive are that kind of accessible or easy for HR teams at the moment to do if you're in that kind of up to 2,500 employees kind of category. But the prescriptive end of things is what's the best outcome possible? What's the kind of relative benefits or values of different interventions? So training course A versus training course B, which one's better? Or training course A and a project. Which one is the best option for our teams? Which one statistically is going to give us the best outcomes? And that's the kind of process. And when I work with HR teams, really encourage them to focus on each step at a time. So work on the descriptive first, understand the suite of data that you want to collect, understand what is possible for your team and improve what's possible for your team, but get descriptive right before you worry about doing diagnostic data. Quite often I see teams who want diagnostic data, but their descriptive data isn't good enough or quickly or readily available. And so they can start working on diagnostic, realize they need a slightly different data set. And when they go back to descriptive, actually it takes too long or it's just too manual to try and pull the data that they need for the diagnostic stage. So this is quite a sequential process. You build on it and improve so that you can get to the kind of higher stages of analysis. But predictive and prescriptive are not necessarily stuff that I recommend most teams worry about at this stage. Descriptive and diagnostic is where we should be looking. And if I put these four things into like what you might expect to see or what you might have seen in terms of data, at the descriptive level, it's exactly that, the metrics we've talked about. How many employees have we got? What's the turnover rate? What's our gender pay gap or gender split? All of that is just descriptive analysis. What's the situation? What's the status quo? Where are we at? So literally, what is happening? What's going on? So that's descriptive analysis. At the diagnostic stage then, when we start looking at why did it happen, we might see that the company gender split has decreased. And that's when we start looking into, okay, what else was happening? What else changed? Maybe the number of applicants dropped, or it was really high, but by the time it got to job offer stage, that had decreased. So that gender split wasn't consistent from kind of initial application through to job offer. And then we can look even further into that and go, okay, why? What happened? Was it that, our teams are not interviewing as sort of openly and diversely as they should? Was it that female applicants were not meeting the requirements? So that's what you expect to see from diagnostic analysis. And this is where I recommend most businesses start making interventions. So at the moment, lots of teams make decisions at this stage. They look at what's going on and then they go, okay, our turnover rate is really low. So let's change X, Y, Z. Let's, offer incentives for people to join or whatever it might be. Or let's encourage early retirement, whatever. lots of companies look at descriptive and say, okay, this is what we need. We know what's going on. Let's change X, Y, Z. But actually, you have to do that one step further. You have to go to the diagnostic stage, and that's where you see the solutions that you need to change. If you change at the descriptive stage, you've got no idea what's really happening underneath it. So where we talked about diagnostic and perhaps female applicants are not getting through the process at the same rate as male applicants, if we have that information, we can make the right intervention, the right solution that changes that. So perhaps we need to change the entry requirements that make it more possible for female applicants to get through the process, or maybe we're not getting enough female applicants, so we need to go out and do different kind of candidate sort of attraction methods. And that's really important. If you try and make decisions too early in the process, you risk making the wrong decision and obviously not improving anything at all. When it comes to predictive, the types of things that you might see, and you'll definitely have seen these in like CIPD papers, in other kind of like KPMG or PwC kind of papers, where we're thinking about what is going to happen. So somebody does that predictive data analysis. You might have sentences like new joiners who attend an HR induction within the first month have lower voluntary turnover and a longer average tenure than those who receive their induction later. That's the kind of thing you expect to come out of predictive data analysis, because that then helps you determine, you know, we really need to get that induction in the first month because it has better outcomes later down the line. And then finally, at the prescriptive stage, when we're looking at what the best thing to happen would be, this is where I think AI, you know, not now, although it probably is for the big companies, but for most companies in sort of 5-10 years or so, this is where I think AI is going to start playing a role, or is one of the ways it's going to play a role, to be able to look at what's going on, predict, and then tell you what's happening and say, here's a solution. So, for example, you might have the system send you an email. This is in my hypothetical future world, that says this employee is a high flight risk, but they're on our high performer list and we don't want to lose them. Therefore, these are the interventions we recommend. This is the best one. This is the next best. This is the third best. And that's the kind of thing that you expect to see come out of prescriptive analysis as well. As I said, not something that most of you will need to worry about at this point. So what does good look like? When it comes to being a data-driven team, I think it's really important to just be clear about the difference between reporting and kind of better reporting. So reporting at the moment for many businesses looks like sharing spreadsheets of people in a particular department, and maybe their salaries or their performance history, whatever that might be. It could be reports sent to external stakeholders or internal stakeholders about maybe gender splits. If you're a public institution in the UK, you get a Freedom of Information Act request. This is the kind of thing that I'm thinking about there. And you could be reporting in your annual report what your gender split is. Stuff like that are quite common for what reporting looks like. It could be manager dashboards that show people KPIs for their team. Literally just, you know, here's the absenteeism rate, or here's the you know, holidays coming up in your team. It's really kind of that descriptive level. Same with HR dashboards, recruitment dashboards, whatever it is, just showing those KPIs and metrics. That's what I quite often see people doing when it comes to reporting. But when you think about all of those things, those are at the descriptive analysis end. They're literally just saying what's happening. They're not giving you much more information than that. And that's also why I'm a bit of a meanie when it comes to dashboards, and I generally sort of say, don't use them. But these are not adding value to your businesses. They're obviously helpful for operational reasons. They help you do stuff, but they are not adding value from a reporting point of view. So some of the things that we could start to look at instead, what good reporting looks like, is having those descriptive statistics, which is a bit of a tongue twister. Having descriptive statistics that you use, so dashboards could be where that comes from, or it could be from sort of separate analysis, but that starts an investigation. It starts you looking into what's going on. It starts that diagnostic process. So this could be things like before and after analysis of interventions. So in L&D, we're quite rubbish at kind of recording or assessing change before and after training. But when we get it right, that's really good reporting, and it's really valuable as well. So that's a good example of what good reporting could look like. You could be looking at correlation and causation analysis. These are quite advanced statistical stuff, so I'm not suggesting you kind of rush out and do that now, but when we talk about like when somebody has an induction in the first couple of months and it improves outcomes later on, there's a relationship there. We don't know what's happening, but we know something good happens. And so starting to look into that is really good reporting that we should be doing. At the end of the day, what reporting should look like, what it should do for us, is solve problems and inform the decision-making process as well. It should be about going into detective mode and diagnosing what's going on. So these are the kind of things that we should be aiming for as HR teams, what we should be kind of trying to do better and improve. And just to reiterate the point of diagnostic analysis is really like about going into detective mode. So getting your magnifying glass out. You can put the outfit on if it helps, but going in there, looking at what's going on with the data and really trying to figure out what's happening here is so valuable, but so underused as well. And it's a really important part of the process. So detective mode, remember it, use it and do it as well. So when it comes to the key skills, I'm kind of thinking about the different kind of stages in the process, or the different steps needed to analyze data. These skills, if you're in a smaller business, kind of 250 people, there's probably only one person on the team who's trying to embody all of these. In a bigger organization, there might be one or two people that does each thing. And at the really kind of higher end of things, if we use IBM again as an example, there's probably entire teams of people and, across the globe as well, who are doing each of these different things. So obviously niche down into each particular skill, just having one team that does that stage of the process. So to kick off, one of the things that you'll need, or one of the kind of skills that you'll need, or things that you'll need to be, is a systems and spreadsheet specialist. I think this is quite often where HR teams really struggle because it's so kind of alien from what we're used to. But this person is super helpful, and if it goes wrong at this stage, it can throw everything else off and give you completely kind of incorrect results. But the system specialist is someone who can pull, clean and compile the data you need. So HR systems quite often have weird quirks. I've worked with PeopleSoft, it's just one example myself, that does some really weird stuff. And if you don't pull the report from the right table, it can look correct, but it's not. And there's no way for you to know that unless you're a system specialist. So it's something that HR people sort of shy away from. There's probably not many people in the team confident or comfortable enough to pull information from a system. But it's a really important skill in the process. So people that can work with spreadsheets, combine data from different spreadsheets, because again, if you're at the sort of 250 to 2,500 employee range, you've probably got a payroll system, probably got an HR system, but they might not be integrated. So somebody who can pull those spreadsheets together for you is super critical. And having that skill, if it's just you, if you're in a kind of standalone data-y type role, that's really important. The next step in the process is the analyst or the statistician. This is somebody who can turn that spreadsheet of data, or those multiple spreadsheets of data, into insights. So it's not just looking at basic percentages, it's going one step further and really digging into that data and analysing it, using more complex statistics like standard deviation and various other kind of correlation and causation analyses, things like that. The analyst is kind of a really critical point between here's the raw data and here's kind of what we know from it and where we go from it as well. They're the kind of people that are using pivots, pivot tables and graphs in Excel. The system specialist is probably using things like VLOOKUPs, data validation, conditional formatting, all kinds of stuff like that, which you might already be familiar with, but if you're not, some really kind of meaty Excel stuff there. So yes, those are the first two steps in the process, or the first two skills. And then the final one is the strategist. So this kind of is the HR specialist in a way. It's the person that knows people best, and they know what the right kind of strategies and processes are. So what they do is they convert those insights, the learnings from the data, which is, turnover decreased because of XYZ. XYZ things also changed. And the strategist then goes, okay, how do we change what we do in HR to fix that? So if I've kind of used this example already, but if you realize that your number of female applicants are down, the strategist is the person that goes, okay, let's figure out how we bring that back up. Do we go and attend some female-led conferences? Do we attend or start marketing on female job boards, for example? The strategist turns the data into HR change. And as I said, this could be one person who has all of these three skills. And I've spoken to a couple of recruiters recently, and this is something that HR teams are quite often asking for in one person, which is, I'm going to go unicorn. It's a really tough blend. The system spreadsheet specialist is really logical, kind of like a librarian, really disciplined. And that takes a real kind of methodical person. The analyst is much more kind of able to look outside, look at the data and do some statistical analysis, not just percentages, but actually dig in and go, what's going on here? What trends are there? What issues are there? And the strategist turns that into HR solutions and says, right, well, we need to change this, or we need to look at this. And getting all of those in one person is quite tricky. But if you want to build your skills, this is the kind of ideal dream, is to have somebody who can go through that entire process and be quite self-sufficient as well. What I do find, and what I've seen in some HR teams, is actually that they kind of have some of these roles, but across different teams. So they might have somebody in the recruitment team, for example, who pulls together the data and sends it to somebody in the HR team. The HR team pull their numbers, and then the L&D team also pull their numbers. And whilst it's brilliant that all of that data is starting to be collected and starting to be used, the challenge can kind of happen that actually you miss the links between those areas if somebody is just giving out the finished article and they're not analysing it together. So with quality of hire, for example, whilst that is a recruitment kind of challenge initially, it can lead into turnover, for example. It can lead into lower performance in the job. And all of those things need to feed back into each other. They need to be kind of looked at together. So it's really important, even if you do have different teams pulling their own numbers, to give them the opportunity to look at the kind of raw data themselves as well, and look into it together and figure out kind of what's going on and what the right solutions are, rather than doing it in sort of siloed teams. So those are the key skills. And then to kind of wrap up this little bit about data-led HR teams and what it's all about, essentially they're using these higher levels of analysis. They're looking at diagnostics, they're looking at predictive, and they're looking at prescriptive analysis or analytics. They're using the insights to make change. They're not just looking at the core numbers and saying, here's what's happening. They're looking at the actual information, the meaning, and the issues that you can kind of pull from that, and using that to make their decisions as a team. So my principles of working with HR data come from my 10 very long years working with data in HR teams. There's 7 of them, so you can also think of them as the 7 golden rules. But these are the things that I have in my head when I'm working on like a system implementation or a process redesign or a report or a dashboard or anything like that. these are the 7 things that I've got in the back of my mind that kind of help me to figure out what the best kind of solutions are. So the first thing, and this is so super critical, whatever you do with data, whether it's the KPIs you collect or the dashboards that you pull together, they have to be relevant to your context. It have to be relevant to your business, to your industry, to your teams, to your goals as an HR team and as a business. So when you look online and you find, here's the 20 KPIs that you should be tracking as an HR team, that's great. Use them, research them, think of them as a catalogue that you can pick from, but one size doesn't fit all. So you really have to look at those metrics and think, which ones matter to our team, which ones are relevant to us, and which ones do we want to track and focus on them. So make sure it's relevant to you. With time to hire, for example, the way that you collect that metric, the exact data that you use will probably and should be different depending on your industry. So if you're in an industry where actually notice periods are really long and that's hindering you as a team and you need to focus on getting people into the business quicker, do some analysis, figure out what's going on, but then you need to make a decision about whether you record time to offer, for example, or you record time to start date, or time to interview, whatever it might be. It has to be relevant to the challenges in your business, the context of your industry, and your goals as an HR team as well. So that one is just like that. If there's one rule, it's that one. Think about what your business needs and design around that. The next one is my Goldilocks principle. You'll have definitely seen this on LinkedIn, but for me, it's all about collecting just enough information to do what you need to do without overloading yourself. So literally just enough and not too much data. In a really kind of strict world, I would really encourage HR teams to look at any dashboards or reports that they produce and defend each metric on that piece of paper or each graph on that piece of paper to say, what is it actually telling you? Do you need it? Is it causing you too much hassle to collect it? Is it valuable? Is it too much? Is it, too advanced for the stage that you're at? If you're not doing anything with it, cut it. It's just a waste of your time. So really focus on creating as much information as you can, but that you can actually use. So as much, not too much. Then I talk about keeping it simple and maintainable. And this one is really, really critical. I've seen HR teams, and I've done it myself as well, when we've been in that process of kind of streamlining and fixing processes in the HR team. But if it takes you 3 weeks to pull together a dashboard of data, and by the time you've reported it to your HR team, it's the end of the month and the new month has started, that's not maintainable. It's not feasible. You can't make any changes about the data that you've just collected if it takes you the whole month to analyze it and work with it. So keep it as simple as possible. Goes back to kind of Goldilocks. Do as little as possible to get the insights that you need, and then build from there. Once you get used to things, you can start building out and adding more, but try and pull it back to as much or as little, as you can to keep it simple and maintainable. Get used to it and grow from there. This next one is a bit of a weird one. It sounds like I'm talking about like health and safety, but minimal manual handling is about trying to do as much in system as possible, trying to do as much, with categories, as much preset stuff as possible, so that you are not using Excel spreadsheets, you're not changing data yourself, you're not recording it manually, because when that happens, it introduces all sorts of errors. So it's really important that when you're building systems, processes, dashboards and reporting, that you think about making it as automated as possible. And this is not to, make people think they have to automate everything, but the goal is to not do too much manually, because when you do it manually, you risk errors. So minimizing manual handling is super, super important. The next one is build for interconnectivity. This might sound a bit weird, but this is kind of, again, it sounds like something I sort of shouldn't need to say, but I do, because it's not always clear to everyone on their journey. So when I talk about interconnectivity, I'm talking about making sure your systems are kind of aligned. So if you've got employee IDs, they should be the same in your HR system as they are in your payroll system, as they are in your LMS, as they are in, your ATS, whatever else, whatever other systems, so that when you pull the reports, the spreadsheets out of your systems, you can literally weave it all together and it's really quick to do. If you've got different, and I've seen it in some companies, if you've got a different employee ID, even if it's just for a small group of people, that slows down the process and also makes it harder later down the line when everything is integrated for you to actually kind of do that seamlessly. And this also applies to like categories. So if you've got two systems that would be recording like leaver data, for example, it's really important that you have the exact same categories. It sounds really silly, but if you've got, left for education, deceased, left for a competitor, whatever those options are, make sure they're the same in all of your systems, so that when you do get later down the line, when you're kind of a more advanced organization or bigger, and you can maybe afford or are in a position to integrate your systems properly from a kind of technology and coding point of view, it will all just fit neatly in together and you don't have to kind of rework that and make changes later on. The next one is build for future you, and you'll see that all of these are kind of interrelated as well. They build on each other and they feed off each other as well. But when I talk about building for future you, there is some of it which is building for interconnectivity in the future, but also with data, quite often you have to start kind of recording the data before you're able to work on it. So you might need to add a new field in the recruitment process, or you might need to add a new field in like the HR profile, employee profile in your HR system. You therefore need to think ahead and make sure that you're providing for yourself the data you're going to need in the future. So that's a little bit about planning ahead for, where your business stage is going to be, where your growth is going to be, what your goals might be next year, what your challenges might be. But it's also about, you thinking, how are we going to want to record it? How are we going to want to work with it? All of those kind of things. And how are the systems going to be interrelated as well? So think about future you and do what you can whilst not overloading yourself with work to kind of prepare the data that you might need in the future. And the final one is consistency. This one is especially true when it comes to external assurance or even just comparing your data with competitors. Consistency is so critical. I've seen companies who change the way that they report on like levers, for example, in their kind of dashboards at the end of the month. When you change the way that you report on that, so maybe you change the categories or you change who you include and who you don't include, that impacts the actual numbers that you get from that process. And you don't know if that number has changed because your process has changed or because the number has actually changed. So if your turnover has gone down, is it because you've changed who you include, or is it because turnover has actually gone down? That's why consistency is really important. And the earlier you can write down kind of like catalogs of what you record in HR, what you measure, what your metrics are, and the data that goes into it, the better, so that you get that consistency. And where I talked about external assurance, for example, that's absolutely critical. It will be kind of a failure point if you start recording things differently. So it's really, really important that you do the same thing in the same way with the same data in, all of the same things every time that you run a particular metric. And that's why consistency is super important. So I promised to give a few Excel tips and tricks. And what I'm going to do is just go through 3 keyboard shortcuts, which I use really regularly. One of them I use literally every time I open a spreadsheet. So I'm going to show you them now. I've got some dummy data, so please don't obviously think that I'm showing you like actual employee data. But the 3 that I'm going to talk to you about are adding filters to your data set. So I'm sure most people do this. Go up to the top ribbon, click data, and click the funnel button. so that you then get the filters and you can click and just show everybody's name starting with A, or show everybody in a particular department. This keyboard shortcut will do that quickly for you. So I'll show you that one in a second, but it will be Control, Shift and L. The next one is how to edit the cell that you're in without having to go up to the bar and click. So if the little black box is around a particular cell that you're working in, if you click F2, it will allow you to go in and edit it instead of you moving your mouse up to the formula bar at the top of the page. And then the final thing is when you're working with formulas, quite often you need to lock the references. So basically when you put in the dollar signs, and if you use F4, you can switch between double dollars, dollar before, dollar after, and no dollar signs to lock your references. So as promised, I'm just going to open up this Excel document, which I hope you can see really clearly. As I said, it is dummy data, so don't worry about that. All I'm going to do is highlight my data. I do it by clicking Control and A, but you can do it by dragging and highlighting it that way, if you're a little bit more, if that's what you're comfortable with. So I'm highlighting all of my data, and then what people would normally do is go up to Data and click Filter, which brings up the drop downs. But if you click Control and Shift and L, you'll also get that to come up, so you don't even have to click on the mouse. And obviously you can toggle it by clicking Control Shift L on and off. What I'm also going to do is show you the F2. So you can see that I've clicked in this cell, but I can't actually edit it at the moment. And normally I would click up here and then I can start editing my formula. But instead, what you can do, you've clicked on the cell, but it's not in the edit mode. If you click F2, you can now see it's switched into edit mode, and I can change what I need to. And then the final keyboard shortcut that I really love and that I use really regularly is to add in the dollar signs when I want to lock a formula or a cell reference. So with this cell in particular, what I'm looking at is calculating the new salary. So I've got the person's salary this year, I've got the increment amount, which is different. You can see some are 3%, some are 5%, some are 6%, some are 1%. So what I've got is their original salary times the increment, basically. What I can do if I want to lock it going down, wouldn't normally do it in this situation, but just for demonstration purposes, if I click F4, you can see that the double dollar signs went on. But for this example, I'm only going to need something like this to lock whether I'm going up or sideways. As I said, this one's not so relevant in this kind of scenario, but if you're building a bigger table and you do want to lock some things, that's when you'll use the other dollar signs. But if I wanted to switch, for example, to see what the increment would be if everybody had the same amount, this is when I definitely would want to lock it to just F1. So instead of it dragging down and being kind of E4, E5, E6, because it's multiplying by this, if I just want the same amount to be the case, I change it to F1 and I lock it. That means when I drag down, it's always going to say F1. And that's your quick keyboard shortcut to do the dollar signs as well. So my last few slides, just to go through, obviously, those are the Excel tips and tricks that I've just shown you. There's one more kind of Excel help guide document that I've pulled together for you. So I've called it my top 5 Excel formulas and features you're probably not using enough. These are the 5 things that I use all of the time. They're incredibly useful. They're great for data cleaning. They're great for combining spreadsheets. They're great for checking information, all sorts of different things that you might want to do in the kind of data analysis stage. So data cleaning and data analysis stage. These are super, super helpful If you're not already using them, these are the kind of things to start learning. And if you are using them, then use them some more because they're brilliant. So there's a worksheet that I'll share with you after the call that summarizes them. I've told you what the actual thing is. So lookups, concatenate, if, pivot tables, and conditional formatting. I've given you a little sentence to understand like what kind of scenarios it works in when you might want to use it. I've also then translated that into kind of HR world and said, if we're doing something in HR, how might we use it? What are some scenarios when we would use it? And then at the end, some information on how to actually use it and what it's all about. So that, as I said, will come to you via email after the program as well, after the call as well. For anyone that's still hanging on and is really curious about the Foundations of HR Data program, I'm just going to spend 2 minutes talking about it. So the main bulk of the webinar is all finished. The Foundations of HR Data program, I mentioned it in the beginning, but it's a program that I run with HR team members. It's designed for people in organizations of about 250 to 2,500 employees. And it could be anyone in HR. So you could be an advisor, you could be a manager, you could be an L&D sort of assistant or anything like that. Even a business partner, anything like that. It's kind of built on 3 pillars. So HR data best practice, and some of the things that we've talked about on this call will be in there and we'll expand on and kind of apply them to your business. But thinking about HR data best practice, thinking about Excel, because being able to use Excel for people in that kind of size organization will be critical to analyzing data. And we'll also talk about statistics as well. So where I mentioned earlier about sort of descriptive versus diagnostic analysis, statistics will come in really handy at the diagnostic stage. And that's something that we talk about in a fair bit of detail on the program. So it's 6 months long. There are 12 90-minute Zoom workshops that we do. So that's every other week we'll have a workshop on a particular topic. There'll be workbooks, there'll be data sets, all kinds of things to help you get the most out of the training. And on the weeks when we don't do a Zoom workshop, there'll be a drop-in Q&A time. So there'll be sort of 30 minutes, an hour in the diary. And if you ever want to pop in and ask a question, ask about the content from the last session, anything like that, that's what that time's there for. There'll be maximum 12 people in it, and it's a super practical kind of need to know daily HR life kind of program. So essentially, I want you to go from someone that dabbles with data to somebody who's really confident in HR analytics and analysis as well. Next program is launching in September, so if you are interested, please do get in touch. I'm going to do a little bit of Q&A at the end, but you will receive these slides. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can just click the link to go through to my profile. If you want to book in for a chat to talk about the program or a data project that you might have, it's a link to my Calendly. And most importantly, if you would like to sign up for the program, there's a link there to the website. You can learn more about it and you can sign up as well. And as promised, I'm going to wrap up with any questions. I can see a couple of comments in chat, so I'm just going to have a look at those and see what they are. But cool. If there's any questions, please do pop them in. I have got a couple of minutes left on the call, obviously. If you want to send your questions to me privately, please do obviously send them through on LinkedIn or on email in response. But yeah, if there's any questions, please put them into chat and I'm very happy to try and answer them now. And aside from that, yeah, I'm always here. I'd be on LinkedIn, have a little chat. It would be a pleasure to meet you. So yeah, I can't see any questions coming through, which I'm hoping means I've answered all of them already. So apart from that, it's an absolute pleasure to have spoken to you today. If you want to watch this again, the recording will come out later this week. And yeah, just please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure. Enjoy, and I'll hopefully speak to all of you soon. And yeah, all good stuff. So have a wonderful afternoon and speak to you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.